Awesome. Thanks, Erin. Thanks, Jinya. Before we dive in, um, we'll just kind of have this conversation. I did have a mindfulness activity planned to begin with, just to settle in, but I think we can kind of maybe save that for the end and just to have some grounding around who we are and what we're all about. So Erin did a beautiful job of talking about Black and Beyond the Binary. Hopefully Jacobson, a Black Hawaiian, will be popping in today. And I'm sure many of you have heard of Feed the Mass. Feed the Mass is this amazing nonprofit that does a lot of work around food justice and empowering and connecting people of Portland through food. Feed the Mass does a lot of collaborations with a lot of wonderful nonprofits, including Utopia PDX. So please be on the lookout for that. And we'll talk a little bit more about food justice and food sovereignty today. And also stay tuned and follow us. We're going to have so many wonderful events today all around intersectionality and our celebration of our Black and Indigenous identities. All right, so maybe I'll divvy this one up with Jinya. We're from Utopia PDX, which is the United Territories of the Pacific Islanders Alliance, the Portland chapter. There are chapters all over the nation, and Jinya and I are going to go with Kaina and Joseph next week to Montana for a convening, just to really imagine the vital roles of queer and trans-Pacific Islanders, especially in the diaspora, and to ensure a world that values, nurtures, respects, and celebrates. So we call ourselves QDPIs or Cutie Pies, which is very sweet and talks about our navigation of self-determination and empowerment. And sis, would you like to take the rest?
Thank you. I kind of find it hard to believe that we formed 6 years ago now. And we formed because we felt like there really wasn't a space for us to be able to explore and celebrate our cutie pie identity, our intersectional identities, the things that we go through in our lives, our histories, our cultures. So we decided to go ahead and give it a try. As Serena had mentioned, there was already Utopia PDXs in places like California and Washington, but there wasn't any here in Oregon. And so we decided to jump in and get a charter going. And we went from an entirely volunteer-based organization that was more about advocacy and due to the pandemic, we became a direct service provider with community health workers, providing access to testing and vaccination and resource events, as well as things like food access and rental assistance. And I know this happened to many of our organizations, going from more of a volunteer to organizations with staff. So we're really lucky that we now have full-time staff and can continue our programming and policies. Yes, thank you, Shelley, for that. Clapping in the comments. But it's just been such a wonderful and also like an experience that really shows us just what little we have, right? And always making sure that we get the resources to the folks who need it the most. So thank you so much, Serena, for allowing me to share that really quickly. Thank you.
That was beautiful. And honestly, this is a dream come true for me. Jinya Luca and Aaron Waters are my heroes and have done such extraordinary work in the community. And we'll talk about this a little bit more as we get in a bit further, but Pacific Islanders were hit the hardest by the COVID-19 pandemic. We had the highest sickness rates and mortality rates, and especially folks at Utopia PDX really led the charge to get out the vaccinations and the PPE and all the culturally sensitive care that people needed during their darkest hour. And we are really big on intergenerational nurturance and wisdom, and we're excited to be here today to talk about all the things. Many of us are part of OPIC too, which is the Oregon Pacific Islanders Coalition, which is really built out of necessity in 2020 due to these devastating impacts that I just mentioned. And Jenny, you want to tell a little bit more about OPIC?
Yes, so the story goes like this. Basically, at the time, I was an employee with Multnomah County Public Health. I was the program specialist senior for the Pacific Islander community. And Oregon Health Authority released a report that finally disaggregated who exactly was getting COVID-19 positive tests plus hospitalization and including deaths. And like Serena had said, we ended up being the Pacific Islander community as well as the Indigenous communities had really high rates. And so we basically said, hey, we need to have a place to be able to come together and have access to those resources, because at the time we were not seen as a quote unquote priority population. And all of a sudden we were getting phone calls saying things like, you know, what's going on in the Pacific Islander community? How come so many folks are sick? And we said, you know, because unfortunately of the lack of sustained infrastructure to begin with, right? And so we called upon ourselves. Basically, most of us were already friends. We're already Pacific Islander leaders who had already been working together. And what it really took was a text message, emails, and saying, hey, folks, let's get together and talk about what we need. And so the Oregon Pacific Islander Coalition was born because of the COVID pandemic. And the pandemic continues, but unfortunately, you know, some of that funding is going away. And so now we are focused more on broader health and wellness for our Pacific Islanders. And we currently have multiple organizations who are members, including, let's see, Leo Oeofa, Samoa Pacific Development Corporation, Living Islands, Micronesian Islander Community, UTOPIA PDX, and Akalo. And so it's been wonderful to be able to come together and to be able to share resources, help with capacity building, and really get recognition for the work that needs to be done, and making sure that funding is provided appropriately for our different needs. Oh, I'm sorry. I also forgot the Oregon Marshallese Community Association. I want to make sure to give them a shout out as well. Thank you, Serena.
No, thank you, Tanya. And, you know, Tanya mentioned we're passionate about all the things, and OPIC and a lot of the other orgs for the Pacific Islanders in the coalition are very, very passionate about mentorship, about education, around healthcare and housing, very similar to Black and Beyond the Binary. So we're super excited to be here with you all, because I know many of you are very passionate about the same issues. And we love collaborating, we love building coalitions. And it's so good to see you too, Amy. I think there's so much potential as we just kind of come together and reimagine the future based on lessons learned during this beast of a pandemic. So we have a lot that we would love to present, but we're going to take our time, as Erin mentioned, to not rush. And if we don't get a chance to show you all the videos or in their entirety, we'll be providing some of the links, and also give you an email. You can contact us at the end of this, so you can reach out if you have any questions or follow-ups. Many of us are educators by nature, and so oftentimes want to give you your time's worth, and and so I often kind of give TMI, but we're going to try to take it slow here to give time for the captioning to kick in, but also know if we pick up the pace or if you miss anything, we're happy just to follow up with you with anything else that you'd like to explore. And we're going to talk a bit today about the colonization and decolonization of the body, land, food, and mind. Yeah, and so I'll let Ginia kind of unpack this slide briefly.
Thank you so much. So one of the many initiatives that the Oregon Pacific Islander Coalition is working on is a campaign called Ocean Speaks. And basically, one of the many things that we're noticing throughout all of our work is the constant, okay, so I'm going to speak for myself. I feel like I'm constantly inundated with people who ask the same questions about things like, what Pacific Islanders are here? What are the challenges in your community? How can I best help out? And so we created a toolkit in which really shares some of our history about which disaggregated data populations are here. For example, so many times when I'm approached by folks, they have the misconception that it's mostly folks from Hawaii or Tonga or for Samoa who are here, but honestly, it's people from the Micronesian islands, which are like from Chuuk and Yap and Pohnpei and the Marshall Islands and Palau. So there's just a lot of, unfortunately, a lot of misinformation about who is here and how we got here. And so it's a chance for us to tell our story, to control our narrative for self-determination. And I am someone who is always trying to make sure that we tell our stories for us, by us. And so I love that Ocean Speaks provides us with that opportunity. It also provides folks with basically best practices about how to work with our Pacific Islander organizations who's already doing amazing work. Because another thing I find is people will say, oh, I didn't know that organization existed. I didn't know that they were doing. And so it's our chance to tell our stories. And I'll go ahead and briefly go into the decolonization data as well. So the Pacific Islanders, when I was with Multnomah County Public Health, they paid me basically to help with a Pacific Islander data project that then went into some work with the Oregon Health Authority, in which they were doing modernization with multiple organizations and populations, including our Pacific Islanders through Oregon Pacific Islander Coalition. And we ended up doing a wonderful project with this report. This is the way we rise, Pacific Islander Data Modernization in Oregon 2022. And I'm sure that we will be providing you all with the report. It's a beautiful report that really shares just the things that we've been going through. And the reason why we did this is because there isn't enough granular, really meaningful data stories that are being used in order to promote programs and policies that really serve us. So we went and created our own assessment called the PI HEAL, which stands for Pacific Islander Health, Equity, and Liberation. I love it. It's so wonderful. And it shows the state, it shows the counties that we can do research for ourselves and we can control the narrative and that we own the data. I love that we were able to negotiate and say, we want to collect it, we want to analyze it, and we want to report it. And we don't need you to really show us what it is that we're gathering. So I love that it was a community-led data initiative that is really one of the first of its kind in our state. And I'm really proud about the work that was done. And one of the biggest things that we wanted to make sure was everyone was compensated, all the organizations, all the participants. And this was something that the state and the counties weren't exactly used to, but we're really showing that we should always be compensated for everything because our stories is knowledge, our stories is very valuable. And we want to make sure that it's only used for our good, our benefit, and not to go against us. Thank you, Serena.
Thanks, that was wonderful.
Oh, sis, the sound isn't on. Can't hear anything.
Oh yeah, sorry about that. Let me try again.
Thank you.
Been a minute since, okay, my Zoom skills. Let's give this a go.
Being a Pacific Islander, I think it comes down to kuleana or responsibility. It's not just being a part of a category.
We are people that love each other. We love community. We love the ocean.
For us, the ocean is not a barrier for communication, but it's another highway or means for us to communicate with each other and learn from each other.
We're all interconnected. We're all family, from the Melanesian, Micronesians, and the Polynesians.
I think it's really important to see us as who we are because that's our identity, our dignity, and our value that is priceless. You cannot buy that anywhere.
That Pacific Islander identity is very important to us because we feel a kinship as Pacific Islanders, and we feel stronger together because we share a lot of cultural values.
Being a Pacific
All right. I'm realizing we could spend an hour and a half on every slide, but pick up this pace slightly, just so you can kind of see kind of what we're talking about here. These are colonizer boundaries, so to speak, but it kind of gives you the lay of the land, because we'll be talking a little bit about the nuances between and the big differences between Polynesians, Micronesians, and Melanesians as well. And many of us come from a matrifocal and matral lineages. And so a lot of more recent data by folks are definitely verifying that the early seafarers from our cultures were through female lineages, which was very surprising to many based on the narratives we're told. And just to kind of flesh out a little bit what Jinya was mentioning, just how the importance of data aggregation, as many of you know, it's AANHPI Heritage Month, but that's including dozens and dozens and dozens of different ethnicities and lineages. And so we're really passionate about deaggregation. And we'll also talk a little bit about how even about some of the problems with lumping together AMPI, oftentimes that will wash out a lot of the health disparities. And when you start disaggregating, as Jinya mentioned, you'll see these stark differences in both morbidity and mortality rates. Also, we're not a monolithic group, so even just having an HPI is not enough. And you can always collect all the data and do what you can after that as well to kind of like parse out all of these different Pacific Islander identities. So now we want to talk about colorism and anti-Blackness in the Pacific Islander community. This is something I am so passionate about, and it's so wonderful to have this opportunity to chat about it. And I hope we might be visited by some that will help us expand. I pulled this from like the movement, as many of us know, after the murder of George Floyd in 2020, there was a lot of movements around racial justice across the world. And part of that, you know, I'm half Chamorro and Jinya was raised on Guam, kind of came together. A lot of the reasons that I've kind of almost like abandoned part of my Pacific Islander heritage is I notice a lot of misogyny and queer missia and anti-Black racism. And so I'm so excited to have the opportunity to talk about it. This is a statement due to the Independent Guahan Statement on the Solidarity for Black Lives Matter. And I love this quote about how the Black Lives Matter movement and the Chamorro self-determination movement is really about our desire for basic human rights and to be recognized and to protected. And that our liberation is tied with the liberation of the Black community. And we're so excited to talk about the queer and trans Pacific Islander community and how that really braids together with the movement for liberation and justice for the queer and trans Black community. A lot of this does go back to colorism. This is basically a global cultural practice all over the world. And I know that a lot of the derogatory terms, especially in the islands, are very much around colorism. My mom's nickname was Blackie Man. I'm half Desi, and I noticed like the way I'm treated drastically depends on how tan I get and how much melanin is really showing up in my skin. And I think, as many of you know, that colorism is really deep, and typically it's around like the same ethnic or racial group. So oftentimes my sister was named the Brahmin because she has the fair skin, and oftentimes that's very much tied to classism and the way people are treated. This is across the Pacific Islands, across the world, but very much ties into this notion. Colorism in the PI communities, oftentimes a lot of the slang and a lot of the very hurtful words that people use against each other are very much about the color of skin. There's also this othering that takes place quite a bit, especially in, let's say, Chamorro culture. There can be an anti-other islander culture, especially with those that have more melanin in their skin, like an anti-Chuckies sentiment, for example. A lot of it is very much tied to proximity to whiteness. So I hope we can really dig into this as we kind of get in later to the talk, because a lot of what happens, especially when we're talking about, let's say, Native Hawaiians, having that proximity to whiteness often makes it almost like this span of blackness that kind of spreads if you kind of go closer to Melanesia. Also, there's a lot of otherism based on those who come from US territories and commonwealths, as opposed to those that don't have citizenship. So there can be a lot of this like classism and otherism that takes place and combined with what's going on here. I pulled this article and we'll also give you the link, really talking about, Melanesian women and colorism and anti-Blackness. It's very, very clear. And if you kind of go across the world, there's all of these hair straightening products and skin bleaching products. And even with one identity too, there's so much colorism and anti-Blackness, even in the island culture. And the anti-Black racism in the PI communities very much stems from a lot of different roots. A lot of it is the proximity to whiteness and the colonization and kind of adhering to some of the white settler constructs related to, taking away our matriarchy and our religions and our spiritual identities that were very much tied to community. And I don't know if Jinya and Aaron, if either of you want to say anything more right here?
Not right here.
Okay, yeah, would have. All right, let's dig in a little bit to intersectionality. This is something that we care so deeply about, and one reason that Utopia PDX has such an affinity for Black and beyond the binary, because intersectionality matters, and we're also very passionate about disability justice, ageism, all of these different things that have this different constellation of these interconnected factors that influence our power and privilege. And how can we really be thoughtful about intersectional identities so that things don't become across as binary or us versus them? And also, how can we really, really pay attention to both the privileges that we have as an ability to kind of rise up and have a platform to talk about some of the impressions that we are experiencing as well.
So I will hop in here. One of the things I feel is important about intersectionality at this point is a very clear understanding of what the original intent of intersectionality was, the way it came about. And so Dr. Crenshaw was actually trying to talk about a human being who was trying to get a job at GM in the 70s. They originally tried to apply as, I believe, part in the manufacturing section, and well, they didn't hire women, so they weren't going to hire her. The company would hire women in the secretary pool. Well, they didn't hire Black women. So this woman was trying to explain, or Dr. Crenshaw was trying to explain how this woman was dealing with two different types of discrimination at the same time in this interconnected or intersecting way. And they lost that case. GM was told you can hire whoever you want and be discriminating as you want all the way through the 70s. But that, I feel it's important to note because we want to make sure we continue to talk about it as a series of interconnected things that are advantages or disadvantages, but most importantly, aren't just a layering of identities. Because when we do that, we start to get into these weird ass acronyms that we have, right? Like none of these acronyms really explain all of the parts of our identity. We have BIPOC, which, okay, we've broken out some folks, but when we think about Indigenous identity, I know most people aren't thinking about folks from the Pacific Islands. They're more likely thinking about folks from Turtle Island. And so there's a whole group of human, and then you've got Taino folks and the Caribbean. So like there's a whole group of individuals and groups of individuals who aren't being encapsulated by these terms. And so I feel like it's really important that as we continue to figure out how we need to break down or break out these quote unquote acronyms, which I understand people need to have an internal need to try and lump folks together, right? Because they want, if not a one size fits all, it's a one size fits most for these brown folks. And they want us to take what we can get as if visibility is enough. And so the intersectionality piece is always really important for me, especially when we're talking about these different acronyms, because API does not account for everyone. I know folks from the Middle East and Desi folks, you know, Serena was just talking about how identity can get collapsed in that way. So that's my 2 cents.
Love it, Erin. Always love how you drop down. Your 2 cents are worth gold. Yeah. Thanks, Debbie. Oh yeah, we're so grateful for all the work you do too. Yeah, you know, oftentimes with intersectionality, it almost becomes the oppression Olympics, right? Where folks are almost like really trying to be in competition of who has it worse. And oftentimes, and yeah, just to be, especially let's say white women in STEM who kind of think, oh, I know exactly what it means to be oppressed and what it's like to be, you know, a minoritized identity, don't think about what it means to have, you know, different constellation. And so just to kind of go off of what Erin is saying, it's just so important to center who's the most vulnerable and harmed among us. And oftentimes you don't see that in all of these circles where it's just about like almost a competition of who has it worse, as opposed to like who among us can we circle around to use our privilege in order to protect and to advocate for, especially when you think about poor Black trans women, oftentimes like what constellation does it mean to be kind of like considered disposable by society. And we see that in our Pacific Islander community too. And we're just so passionate about intersectionality because it's just such a nuanced thing, and it's not binary. It's very, very complicated and multifaceted, but it's absolutely essential.
Totally.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Go for it. No, go for it, Erin. I was about to drop down about Juneteenth, but that was going to be a total field. Go for it, Erin.
Yeah, I feel like one of the things that's also important to me in these spaces is, as a Black trans femme, this ability to articulate that there is more than just a sad story about us. When we look at the statistics and we're seeing that half or a third or even 2/3 of the community are struggling, there are still members of the community who are finding stability and building community. And how can we look towards and at those folks to help continuing to build? And it's part of why when we talk about intersectionality, when in what ways are some of your identities either privileged or advantaged? If you've managed to get past some of these hurdles, how are we looking back? That's Sankofa. How are we looking back and reaching backwards for folks so that we can help bring them forward? Because otherwise we just end up in a sad place where trans women have lost all their friends and family. These white folks are getting rid of affirmative action quotas as quickly as they can and turning to the model minority myth in order to do so. And so how are folks supposed to navigate when we're looking at individuals who can be shot down very easily, systems of incarceration, which are really, really not well disposed towards any of us. Indigenous communities also really struggle. And if you have not looked at some of the statistics around Indigenous communities and incarceration, please do. And then look further and realize not all those folks are being recorded in terms of incarceration, because some are on an island that is effectively a military base. So how some of that works is really important for the Black community to kind of understand as well. And so as we move into the next slides, I'll talk a little bit about that.
Thank you, Erin.
All right, so I will gladly take, so in terms of challenges in building bridges, when we talk about the Black community and Indigenous communities, Pacific Islander communities in particular, one of the things that we struggle with is this idea of the model minority mythos, that the Asian community is so successful that no one else has to worry about it. And then they say Asian without really qualifying the fact that they're talking about China, Japan, and Korea. That's it. And that model minority mythos is something that ends up driving a wedge, like I just mentioned. Well, there are lawsuits advancing based on, well, Asian folks are not being admitted to particular schools. These white folks are being admitted less. Why do Black folks need any kind of support around it? And it's really frustrating, of course, because, you know, we weren't even allowed to go to the same schools until 1965. And they're continuing to tell us that we can't do that. So that model minority mythos becomes a wedge, an unnecessary wedge, because we have these individuals who may have had an opportunity to come here by whatever means. Most folks are not able to change countries, you know? And so there's already a deeper and more nuanced conversation that has to be had about it. What the Black community does know is work with the larger Asian community, right? Like Yellow Peril, and things along those lines. And so while there is some work, and that work has been continual, it is really tends to be focused on certain larger, more well-known countries. And so that's really frustrating, because that lack of knowledge about the Pacific Islander community means we're really missing out on some really significant places where we can build bridges around things like climate change, around things like incarceration, around things like how the military affects our communities, because the Black community is also highly picked from in terms of accessing the military. And then we just mentioned that oppression Olympics, you know, well, you don't have it so bad, I have it worse. There's an entire group of Black folks who are effectively kind of xenophobic and conservative. They really believe in scarcity mindset, and they believe that the African descendants of slaves deserve everything before everyone else. And I gotta be honest with you, I'm not here for it. The only way we're gonna build is if we can find a way to work together, because there are, I mean, how does someone whose identity is mixed fit into that? How do we make parts of ourselves stand in line behind other parts of ourselves? And so if we can go to the next slide, I have some thoughts that we could hopefully get folks in the chat to engage with, if you're feeling. Otherwise, I'm sure me, Ginia, and Serena will gladly riff on all of it. So in terms of, you know, building bridges, it's kind of in the center. There's more information that will be coming, but what we really want to do is help folks think about the ways in which we can build with community that we may not already know. And the steps to do that are kind of right here. We get to think about overlaps in experience. The example of the military and military service and how important that can be to our communities, how uplifting and how necessary, because you may not have other options. The continuing climate change. I really, really wish the Black community could build differently with Pacific Islander communities around climate justice. A lot of our children are being raised in really, really terrible spaces because it's all we could afford. The white folks didn't want to live there, and they don't care what's happening to the ground with fracking. They don't care what's happening to the ground with air pollution. They're not worried about it. And then of course, the ways in which representation in politics and political power, how does that work for really small communities, right? Like, how are we supposed to build enough coalition if folks don't know about us? They want us to stand in line behind other groups because there are more people. And in my opinion, that's really just furthering white supremacy, right? You want to help the largest number of people, quote unquote, every step of the way. So it's this law of diminishing returns until the folks at the back don't have anything left. And then I'm always down to talk with folks from places that Americans consider tourist locations. Why is it so complicated? Let's talk about that. Because to some degree, some of these communities do need some of the money, but also maybe they wouldn't have to rely on that the same way if sovereignty had been established a little bit differently. And so these are the kinds of questions I think our communities could really talk about if we want to build bridges. Thoughts, feelings? That includes participants. Please feel free to hop in the chat. Come on through. Give it a few more seconds, but if no one else wants to hop in, then I will definitely call on either Ginny or Serena.
I'm ready, but I'm also really wanting to make room for folks who are here as participants. So feel free if you want to use the chat or if you want to unmute. Yes, thank you.
I just really was appreciating kind of that you're talking about colorism, because I feel like that's something that's not talked about or discussed enough, and that as a global issue, not just something that's centered in the US. And also talking about the experience of being mixed and where the overlaps are, and trying not to segment people who are mixed, and not having to choose between identities, because that's kind of not realistic. We can't fragment ourselves effectively, right? And nor should we, which is kind of like the larger discussion in a way. Like, how do we build those bridges? How do we connect? How are we embodying ourselves as whole individuals? and not having to pick between our various identities. So I'm just appreciating this discussion and the topics that are coming up, because I feel like those topics are not discussed enough.
My gosh, yes. Anti-Blackness and colorism are worldwide. Yeah, we could do a whole presentation on that. So thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you so much for the comment. I'm going to go ahead and read it out loud if you don't mind. I think what's hard is how so many people will lean into tourism as a means to island communities without more curiosity about why they are doing anything else. I grew up in a tourist destination. Ethnically, my mother is from the island of Palau and my father is white. So I am Palauan and white, and but I grew up on the island of Guam, and Guam is a tourist destination, and so I lived there for 25 years before moving here to the United States, the continental US. So my lived experience is really different when I see tourism. I did see how so many times the island would worry if we're going to get enough tourists from, most of our tourists came from Japan. They had made themselves be this like, quote unquote, we're closer and cheaper than Hawaii, so why don't you come here mentality. And so there's a lot of folks who rely on tourism dollars in order to survive. But what I also see, while I'm not from Hawaii, what I've kind of seen in Hawaii is this movement for to not go there, right? I've seen this movement of maybe don't come here, right? Because unfortunately, tourists can be very destructive. Some of our islands were not made for the infrastructure, for the amount of people coming in and out, relying on minimal resources that are coming in. When the pandemic happened and so many of our island homes were no longer tourist destinations, so many people lost their jobs. In Palau, they want a little more tourists to come, but they're also realizing the environmental impact of tourists who come through, that we actually have this that's called, oh gosh, I think it's like pristine Palau. There's one word I know that I'm missing, but basically it's saying, hey, tourists, when you come here, you're going to pay a fee up front and you're going to take a pledge that while you're here visiting, you will do the following things, including like being environmentally friendly, making sure that you are paying as much of your spending dollars to locally owned places, right? Too many times in the tourism industry, that money is being funneled out to outside entities and not back to the community, which is very damaging. And so the tourism is so hard, even for me to go to another place to go visit without understanding my own impact. And so sometimes I find myself when I travel, I'm just like, okay, I don't want to do what tourists would do, you know, while I'm here, how can I be a good visitor and all of that? So I find that that's kind of really ingrained into my mentality when it comes to tourism. My father was in the military and I grew up on Guam, which is a military base. Guam became a US territory after World War II due to the United Nations and the United States created the Trust Territories of the Pacific Islands. And it was decided because Guam was in a quote unquote strategic location, AKA a place where planes can take off or bombs can take off to various regions that the United States are trying to quote unquote protect us from. And there's a large military base, army base, navy base. And growing up on Guam, going to school on Guam, I graduated in 1995. And military recruitment on our islands is so heavy. So many of our folks go into the military. And a lot of times for me, what I experienced was one, our guidance counselors signing us up for the ASVAB test, basically the placement test to get into the military. We had like military recruitment people come to the school. And so the narratives were, in order to leave the island or have a good quote unquote job and benefits and all that, you should either marry someone in the military or you should join the military. I actually took the test, and when recruiters were calling, my father, who retired from the military, he hung up on all the recruiters because he said, I don't want you to go through what I went through. So while he never talked about his military service, he's a vet from the Vietnam War, Desert Storm, all that. He was like, nah, not my kiddo. But I just kind of wanted to share some of that like, it's this weird like tension of the military provides so much dollars to places like Guam, and yet it's so damaging to our islands as well, especially like right now in the Commonwealth of Northern Mariana Islands, where the military is using some of their beautiful islands to do things like military quote unquote games, where they're practicing their war games and destroying environment. The military is another thing that happens with the military is after World War II was the Compact of Free Association agreements with the Republic of Palau, Republic of the Marshall Islands, and the Federated States of Micronesia. So for example, in the Marshall Islands, the military went there and did destructive nuclear testing, multiple bombs that were tested that were larger than the Hiroshima bomb. And the other islands saw this happening, and the military said things to the natives like, don't worry, you'll be able to go home, you'll be able to go back to your lives. It's been generations, and people are still very, very sick from radiation poisoning. And that's one of the many reasons why so many of us have immigrated to the continental United States, is access to healthcare, is because we're being pushed out. And I feel like not a lot of people know this particular part of history. Growing up on Guam, I actually learned more about the United States history than I did about my own island. And a lot of what I learned, it's just from my own experience and my own questions. I don't want to take up too much time, but I just kind of wanted to touch a little bit in a couple of the questions. Thank you.
I love what you shared. My family is also from Saipan and Guam, and it's just so heartbreaking when you do art going around the islands. And on Guam, there's you know, I used to have a military ID to get to our family's property, and there's all these suicide cliffs on Saipan, just kind of reminiscent of the war. And all that exploitation of the land, especially so you can have sweatshops and have the products, say, made in the USA, it's really a travesty. And I really appreciate Aaron and Zubby's parallels, because oftentimes you don't hear people connecting climate justice to the experience of African Americans, and also the military as well. And Adeline, so good to see you. Congrats on your graduation. We also talk a lot about those from the Philippines and kind of losing that identity, where you're not quite Pacific Islander, not quite Asian, your own thing. But there's a lot of parallels there about what's happened to the land and our cultures and colonization, especially by the Spanish Catholics. And I could go on and on and on about that. But absolutely. And oftentimes there can be voluntourism as well, or people feel like they are traveling but doing good deeds. And how can you be, I mean, we love our islands and they're so beautiful, and but how can we just be good citizens of this island and good stewards when you are visiting the land? Wonderful. Okay.
So this is another one that I threw in there because why not? And I think part of what the previous questions were about was this: what does solidarity look like? Because we have to figure that out for ourselves. Huey Newton used to talk about how we have not yet built a revolutionary system. And so that's still part of our future. It's still part of our creativity. And I feel like there is an opportunity for the Black community to engage, I wouldn't say a little bit differently, you know, just to engage a little bit differently around these communities who have so much in common with us. I feel like there could be real significant coalitions built around environmental justice and that kind of racism, and talking about colorism and how anti-Blackness is worldwide. I think it comes down to events like this and opportunities like the one we have here. I think it's going to come down to finding a way to meaningfully have conversation around Oppression Olympics and how we get past that. Because I feel like there are a number of folks who really struggle with, well, I have this history or I have this experience. Why do these other folks have to get something before me, as opposed to seeing it as a continual push on all sides moving forward? So I just appreciate the engagement that B3C has had with y'all. I'm really, really excited to see how we can continue to build with our community. So.
Wonderful. We're so excited too. And we hope this is just the beginning of many. And I did hear back from Jacob, who is Black Hawaiian and is part of Feed the Mass. And I think I could share that Feed the Mass is in dire straits and is in possibility of ending. And that's what happens, you know, when you start these nonprofits and they become really powerful, but you have these streams of funding, especially federal streams, when there's a crisis, right, like a pandemic, and then not thinking about like the recovery in the long game. And oftentimes that can cause more harm than good, especially if you are investing just in party programming and some of these feel-good things and not thinking about the longevity of our organizations. A lot of nonprofits are in a really tricky place right now, where they're running a lot on COVID dollars, which are ending, and now's the time to reimagine. And luckily, you know, the Pacific Islanders had a convening with different funders about what we're passionate about. But it's real, right? And there's a lot of people who will be out of a job or out of an organization soon because folks are not thinking about the long game. And, you know, oftentimes this is just, you know, what was made available, but at the same time, you know, people's livelihoods and their futures are at stake. So excited just to continue to work with y'all and just build the future together. And we are stronger in numbers. So I just wanted to send my regrets from Jacobson. But we are doing some beautiful things with Feed the Mass with Utopia PDX. And having some like cooking demonstration with all these different Pacific Islander identities. Feed the Mass also does some amazing stuff as well. So I'll reach out and just see if some of the stuff is coming up, and let's save each other. I think this is such a powerful time for those who are really thinking thoughtfully and deeply about intersectionality, just to not be in competition, but in collaboration and community. And that's why I love our peeps. We are all about building community and not about this othering, but what do we have in common? And so it's just such an honor and a thrill just to be in community with Utopia folks and Black in the Binary folks, and thinking about our shared identities and experiences and ways that we can think about intersectionality in a very thoughtful and enduring way. All right, so this is on our Utopia PDX website. So I think I'm going to go ahead and skip over it for now and stay for some shorter ones. But if you, we'll put our website in the chat, and we'll have it up on the screen if you want to go check it out. But you know, as an academic, language is constantly evolving, and oftentimes, you know, in psychology, phobia means something very, very unique. And there's, as opposed to kind of like all of the hate and the fear and disgust and all the things that come packed when you are doing that othering. And so I use the word queermisia and transmisia just because it kind of captures that amalgamation of hate and disgust and all those sorts of things. It's kind of like how I don't use the word trigger anymore, because I find it triggering having had experiences with gun violence. And so just when I kind of say that word, that's what I mean. But really, as we're about to unpack births, like a lot of this diversity and sexuality and gender have been held sacred in our identities and in our cultures until colonization, which really led to a lot of queermisia, transmisia, and heteronormativity.
The first time
I'm going to skip this. I had a talk with Tino Camacho yesterday, and what I love about his work, he might pop in too, it's just really talking about, like, traditional gender roles are really from colonization and heteropatriarchy. All of these things like transmisogyny, heterosexism, queermisia, transmisia are really about systemic oppression, because we have had this diversity for millennia, and it's just really tragic what often happens due to colonization. I was asked to give a teaser here, in that there will be a zine coming out really about the Indigenous collaborative research around the health and cultural experiences of queer and trans Pacific Islanders. So I have Tino's email there if you want to connect. And we're all about collaboration. And so if any of you want to talk a little bit more about this, I think there's just more to come. There's art exhibits and a lot of events just to really dig into these things that we are just so passionate about. I think I will go ahead and play this one because it's short and sweet. But Trans-Pacific Islanders, as I mentioned, have been around for millennia. And it's really important just to kind of understand how they are, throughout the Pacific Islands. And there's often a different definition. And I'll go ahead and play this, and then we'll unpack things a bit.
Before the coming of foreigners to our islands, we Hawaiians lived in aloha, in harmony with the land and with one another. Every person had their role in society, whether male, female, or mahu. Those who embraced both the feminine and masculine traits that are embodied within each and every one of us. Mahu were valued and respected as caretakers, healers, and teachers of ancient traditions. We passed on sacred knowledge from one generation to the next through hula, chant, and other forms of wisdom. When American missionaries arrived in the 1800s, they were shocked and infuriated by these practices and did everything they could to abolish them. They condemned our hula and chant as immoral. They outlawed our language, and they imposed their religious strictures across our lands. But we Hawaiians are a steadfast and resilient people. And so, despite 200 years of colonization and repression, we are still here.
And, a lot of Utopia Washington really celebrates the Samoan Fa'afafine, and it's really translated in a manner of a woman. And there will be some really powerful events that are coming up, and that we will be really unpacking a bit more here. What I wanted to do here is just talk a little bit about, these gender fluid roles that have been around and how these folks that have been held sacred for so many years are now really cast to the fringes of society. Oftentimes pushed into sex work, low-paying, hard labor work, and oftentimes there's a lot of rights that are violated because of this. I put in the slide about the Hijra because, I'm half Desi, and I've noticed the very same thing happen in the Indian culture and a lot of other South Asian cultures, just in that the very people who are held the most sacred in society, and this also applies around the world, are often now kind of cast out and oftentimes having to be, the sex workers and being very low in socioeconomic status, being much more susceptible to rape, other types of violence, murder, as well as suicidality due to kind of this lack of acceptance. Hijras also have a really interesting position in India because there's kind of this way of reconciling like these notions and terms that have been around for millennia with kind of modern day ways of thinking about gender identity and sexuality, and oftentimes it can also lead to a bit of clashing in that not all transgender people are hijras or members of guru families. So oftentimes a lot of classism in the caste system can also have an interplay with some of these issues that we're talking about today. Let's see. Trying to decide if I should play it or not. Sure, why not?
আমি যখন ক্লাস 5 বা 6-এ পড়ি তখন আমার কাছে মনে হলো যে আমি স্বাভাবিক মানুষের থেকে একটু অন্যরকম, কারণ আমার হাঁটা চলা ছিল একটু মেয়েদের মতো, আমার কথা বলার স্টাইল ছিল মেয়েদের মতো, এবং আমি যে বাইরে খেলতাম যে খেলাগুলো আছে মেইনলি খেলাগুলো আমার কাছে ভালো লাগতো, দড়ি লাফ। যখন ফর এক্সাম্পল আমি স্কুলে গিয়েছি, আমি কিন্তু ফার্স্ট বেঞ্চে কোনোদিন বসতে পারিনি। আমি যখন স্কুলে গেট দিয়ে ঢুকতাম তখন থেকে আমার স্কুলে যত ফ্রেন্ডস ছিল, টিচার ছিল, সবার চোখ আমার দিকে ছিল। স্কুলে পড়াশোনা করতে গিয়েছি, আমাকে লাস্ট বেঞ্চে বসতে হয়েছে। আমরা বিলিভ করি, বিশ্বাস করি হিজড়া হচ্ছে একটা কালচার যেটা আমাদের একদম আদি পুরুষ থেকে হয়ে আসছে। হ্যাঁ, কালচারটা হচ্ছে যে আমরা মনে করি যে হিজড়ারা বাড়ি বাড়ি গিয়ে বাচ্চা নাচায়, একটা আশীর্বাদ, বাচ্চাকে আশীর্বাদ করে টাকা উপার্জন করে। এটা যুগ যুগ ধরে আসছে এবং বিভিন্ন জায়গায় অনুষ্ঠানে বিয়ে বাড়িতে নাচ গান করে থাকি, নাচ গান করে তার একটা টাকার উপার্জন, টাকার উৎস। যেহেতু হিজড়াদের কোনো জায়গায় তাদের এক্সেস ছিল না, সো এটা যুগ যুগ থেকে একদম যুগ যুগ থেকে এটা চলে আসছে হিজড়া পরম্পরা, যেটা বলে একটা গুরু শিষ্যর পরম্পরা। ফর এক্সাম্পল আমি যখন বাংলাদেশ টেলিভিশনে নৃত্যশিল্পী হিসেবে অডিশন দিতে যাই, সেখানে সারা বাংলাদেশ থেকে 1000 নৃত্যশিল্পী এসেছে অডিশন দেওয়ার জন্য। কিন্তু আমি যখন সেজে গুজে গেলাম, আমি কিন্তু কাউকে বলিনি যে আমি ট্রান্সজেন্ডার, আমি একজন মেয়ে হিসেবে গিয়েছি। যখন দেখলাম যে ইন্টারভিউর সময় আমাকে প্রশ্ন করেছে, আমি কিন্তু প্রত্যেকটা প্রশ্ন এবং কারো রিকোয়েস্টে না, আমি আমার নিজের যোগ্যতায় গিয়েছি এবং নিজের যোগ্যতায় সেখানে পারফরমেন্স করেছি। পারফরমেন্স করার পর যখন আমাকে জাজ ডাকলো যে তোমার নাম কি, যখন আমি বললাম যে যেহেতু আমাদের ভোটার আইডি কার্ড আছে, তখন আমি বলছি আমার নাম মাসুদুল হক রানা। হ্যাঁ, তুমি ট্রান্সজেন্ডার? আমি ট্রান্সজেন্ডার। সঙ্গে সঙ্গে মনে হলো জায়গাটার মধ্যে সাংবাদিক ভরে গেল, আর তারা মনে হয় জাজরা আকাশ থেকে পড়লো যে এটা কী করে সম্ভব, এত সুন্দর যোগ্যতা, এবং প্রত্যেকটা প্রশ্নর 100% অ্যান্সার দিয়েছি, কারোর রিকোয়েস্টেও যায়নি।
I'll unmute myself. And I hope I'm not making you too dizzy. I thought I would show you a clip about this one too, just to bring it back to Utopia, Washington, and all of the amazing work they're doing there, just to raise awareness. Critical awareness is so important. So if we raise our consciousness, we can go on to educate and hopefully dismantle some of this hatred and this otherism that's so prevalent out there.
I am the co
Leadership for UTOPIA. I live and work on the unceded territories of the Duwamish people. I identify as a Fa'afafine. I also identify as a trans woman.
I'm a trans woman of color, and my pronouns are she, her. We're so unique. We carry so many identities. My pronouns are she, her.
I am a proud Fa'afafine and trans woman of color.
I'm a woman and I have intelligence and I have something to say, and if I work hard and push these barriers down, then like nothing's gonna stop me.
And I am a trans woman.
I am an unapologetic Fa'afafine creative.
We're vibrant people. It's inevitable for you to cross paths with someone like me.
Something special. Transgender means to be part of something that's not like anything else. We tend to gravitate towards one another just by that label, like trans.
Being transgender is a person that experiences both sides of the world, whether it's from your own scope or somebody else's. It's a tough life to live, but it's worth it.
It means murder, but it also means survivor.
Creating opportunities for yourself to live on your own beliefs of what you want to be. Living with conviction in public spaces, not just in public spaces, but around your close spaces as well, with an environment that surrounds you with love and acceptance and having to be visible.
When you don't identify with the gender you were assigned at birth.
It means to be your true self, or despite what you were born as or what the world is telling you to be, you're just living your true identity.
It means freedom and freedom for me to express myself.
A common misconception is that this is a choice, as if being teased would be anybody's choice.
Is that they fear us. And I want to tell you that we're not to be feared. We're looking for the same validations, the same level of acceptance that everyday human beings have. Us being labeled as nothing more than sex objects.
I know for me, being a trans woman for 6 years, I'm still referred as a gay man. And so, and that's a misconception where someone's like, oh, well, you still have, you know, X, Y, and Z. I was like, well, that doesn't mean, I was like, it's gender identity. It's a totally separate thing versus sexual orientation.
That we are not hard workers, that we try to find the easy way out.
We are trying to be something we're not, when in actuality we're just living our true identities despite what people may think we're supposed to be or we're assigned.
People just assume the worst. I know that there's like a huge, I don't want to say it's a campaign against trans people, referring to them as pedophiles, referring to us as like, that we're tricking people. It's annoying, because first off, no one has time for that. You know, it's, people really think that we have so much time, that we're so focused, that we're a group of people who's solely focused on making people's lives miserable and just seeking attention, when we're just regular people who are just, we're born in these bodies that are different from what society says, and we're trying to navigate life through that.
Fitting into society, like, you know, just out and about without getting like people like doing like, you know, an up and down look at you.
We have more difficulty navigating public spaces more frequently than others, especially when it comes to accessing healthcare needs. There doesn't seem to be a lot of people in the medical field who necessarily know how to work together with the trans community to bring about the care that we're seeking.
But more importantly, it's important for people to learn from trans people.
It's important to learn about us because we've learned about you. Maybe you could pick up a few talents.
One, I believe people should be learning about diverse people in general, specifically transgender people. I think we have a unique perspective on things. We grew up being told something that we're supposed to be one way, and we lived our whole lives knowing what we felt and what we knew, who we are inside. And despite the community and everybody telling us what we're not supposed to be, lived our true identities.
I believe that it's inevitable for anybody to come across paths with somebody that is like me.
Well, for one, we obviously exist here in this world, and not a lot of people are educated. They think that, our lives are just, it's a joke or just for fun or, dress up. But, this is who we are.
I could tell myself one thing. It's to run. Run till your legs give out.
Be more patient with my mother and to bring her along in my journey. And
to trust the process and always believe in time, because time will exceed all odds. Not to conform yourself for the benefit of others. Have confidence in who you are.
That I stay brave, I stay happy.
Be yourself, don't be apologetic. Continue to love people regardless of how they treat you. Not to be so sensitive, say. And also just continue to keep my head up, held high and stay positive.
And so I would tell my younger self that whatever you're feeling is valid, and I would write the whole definition of what valid meant so that my younger self would understand that.
Great. Time is going by quickly. Just wanted to touch on cultural humility because we feel like it's such an important thing just to really integrate into our daily lives. It's really a lifelong process just to lean in. It involves that critical self-reflection and true humility, because oftentimes when you see cultural arrogance, it's kind of folks who are just feel like they know it all or set in their ways. And if we're open to personal critique, if we're open to unlearning and relearning, it just really, really allows a lot of deep listening. And many of us here are educators and love mentoring. We really, really honor our older generations as well as the younger generations. And I think as educators, oftentimes that was our superpower, to have the youth lead the way and to let us know how we can do right by them, by really doing some deep listening and really bringing to a place of towards cultural safety where there's sensitivity and awareness and the humility and, competency is a part of that, but competency, like tolerance, is very 1970s. We need to move kind of past that towards a place of growing and learning constantly and unlearning. So a lot of old patterning we have to do. Just to build a little bit off of intersectionality, we're really, really talking about a lot of these impacts Since we talked quite a bit about colonization fueling queermisia and transmisia, I want to talk a little bit about misogyny and patriarchy here, which is really, really prevalent in all societies, especially the Pacific Islander societies, especially because many of us, as I mentioned, come from a matrilineal, matrifocal background, and oftentimes with colonization came those patriarchal impacts. And Guam has the second highest rates of rape in the entire nation, and also doesn't have access to the reproductive justices that are needed, so much so that the ACLU had to kind of step in just to make sure that there's abortion access for folks on the islands, because it often leads to this really, really vicious cycle when you're in a culture of sexual violence, and then if you aren't able to have access to reproductive care, you get very much trapped, and it can be and very much of it is kind of trapped in the shroud of shame and in families as well. Rape culture is a big part of a lot of these colonization religions as well, which, as many of you know, I could go on and on about as well. I did want to bring up Famaloan rights. They weren't able to be here today, but it's really inspiring because, I often thirsted, and a part of me really neglected my Pacific Islander heritage because I found it so problematic. It was just, I saw so much racism, so much rape culture, so much colonization, and kind of this lack of things. But just to see rising out of the misogyny, this fight for basic human rights for all genders is really, really inspiring. And just to have that level of discourse around having affordable and timely reproductive health care until very, very recently, until like national awareness stepped in, like there was no access to reproductive justice and abortion care on Guam. So you had to travel all the way to Hawaii to have access to those healthcare needs. And that takes a lot of privilege and wealth to travel that far. And so we're going to talk about challenges and opportunities in anti-racism work within the Black and other communities regarding the PI community. And Aaron, I don't know if you want to chime in here.
I mean, so I think the issues around anti-racism, I think, can be anti-Blackness. It's complicated because, like we talked about earlier, anti-Blackness is worldwide, it is consistent, and so it can be difficult. I just get stuck on the whole scarcity mentality, because that's where this comes from. And I feel like if we are going to make some change, visibility is going to be the first step. We're going to have to continue to try and make these things visible. But I feel like we're going to have to find a way to sit down and engage with people in a different way. I don't know if that's through events. I don't know if that's through continued panels and things like this. But raising the conversation is going to be challenging because we are small. We're really small communities. But there are opportunities to get involved in anti-racist work by just coming to our events. That's really a start, because you get to find out how folks from these communities really live, how we are trying to engage with one another, and then not have to reinvent the wheel, right? The liberatory consciousness model, we go from awareness to analysis to accountability and then to action, which will give folks an opportunity to find out where we are already kind of connected so that we can build a better bridge. Because, like you said, utopia is everywhere.
Thank you so much, Aaron. So well said. We're going to move a bit into climate justice because we really wanted to dig in here. And I love how Aaron and Zoe have to see these intersections with the Pacific Islander community. As we mentioned, speaking of rape culture, so has what happened to our land and our cultures and our food. As Junior mentioned, there's a lot of nuclear testing sites, military bases as well. I'm going to play one of my favorite poems just to kind of bring us into this topic a little bit more.
Our next speaker was selected from more than 500 candidates to represent the voice of civil society From the Marshall Islands, please welcome Kathy Jetnil Kijiner.
Yahweh Moliv, I would like to share with you a poem that I have written for my daughter, Matefele Benham. Dear Matefele Benham, you are a 7-month-old sunrise of gummy smiles. You are bald as an egg and bald as the Buddha. Your thighs that are thunder, shrieks that are lightning, so excited for bananas, hugs, and our morning walks along the lagoon. Dear Matefele Benham, I want to tell you about that lagoon, that lucid, sleepy lagoon lounging against the sunrise. Men say that one day, that lagoon will devour you. They say it will gnaw at the shoreline, chew at the roots of your breadfruit trees, gulp down rows of your seawalls, and crunch through your island's shattered bones. They say you, your daughter, and your granddaughter too, will wander rootless, with only a passport to call home. Dear Matefele Benham, don't cry. Mommy promises you, no one will come and devour you. No greedy whale of a company sharking through political seas, no backwater bullying of businesses with broken morals, no blindfolded bureaucracies gonna push this mother ocean over the edge. No one's drowning, baby. No one's moving. No one's losing their homeland. No one's gonna become a climate change refugee. Or should I say, no one else. To the Carteret Islanders of Papua New Guinea and to the Taro Islanders of Fiji, I take this moment to apologize to you. We are drawing the line here. Because baby, we are going to fight. Your mommy, daddy, boo-boo, dimma, your country, and your president too, we will all fight. And even though there are those hidden behind platinum titles who like to pretend that we don't exist, that the Marshall Islands, Tuvalu, Kiribati, Maldives, and Typhoon Haiyan in the Philippines, and floods of Pakistan, Algeria, and Colombia, and hurricanes, tidal waves, and earthquakes didn't exist? Still, there are those who see us, hands reaching out, fists raising up, banners unfurling, megaphones booming, and we are canoes blocking coal ships. We are the radiance of solar villages. We are the rich, clean soil of the farmer's past. We are petitions blooming from teenage fingertips. We are families biking, recycling, reusing, engineers dreaming, designing, building, artists painting, dancing, writing. We are spreading the word. And there are thousands out on the street, marching with signs, hand in hand, chanting for change now. They're marching for you, baby. They're marching for us. Because we deserve to do more than just survive. We deserve to thrive. Dear Matefele Benham, you are eyes heavy with drowsy weight. So just close those eyes, baby, and sleep in peace. Because we won't let you down. You'll see.
Our next speaker.
Yeah, thank you so much. So Virginia put in the link to Kathy's website. Has roots in Matefele's in 3rd grade too, like my little.
Yeah,
Yeah, do you wanna
I
say
cry
something?
every time I see that video, and I think to myself, I've had the opportunity to kind of watch that little girl grow up a little bit, right? Because she lives partly here and then partly in the Marshalls. And it's just amazing to me how many years has gone by, and also just how stubborn government is and how big corporations are so stubborn and push back so much as I watch this little girl grow up, and yeah, it's so baffling to me how so many people are fighting for climate change, yet there's so many other people in the world who are turning an eye away or just denying it. It's just, yeah. I don't got much to articulate except for my frustration in all of it.
Oh, frustration is valid and real. You can feel the passion coming out, and it is, I mean, words do fail to kind of capture what has happened to the land and the culture and the food, and this whole history across the Pacific Islands, across the world, really. And it's just like the impacts are just so, so devastating. Let's see. Well, probably, I got these from John. Yeah, how about we just hover here, because I want to leave time if there's time for discussion, and I'm happy to go back, show a video, because we were just so passionate about, how this impacts us. As many of you know, Pacific Islanders, very much like the Native American and the African American community, have really, really high rates of health disparities around the colonization of our bodies and food. And oftentimes in westernized culture can often be depicted as our personal failings about our sedentary lifestyles, or eating too much without thinking about the impact that colonization has had on our food and our culture. And it's not about individual failings as much as it is about systemic racism. And so some of our work is just to raise awareness around these issues, and also to return the roots to the decolonization of our food and culture in order to kind of like preserve our cultures that often get lost. We often have kind of an oral tradition of passing around our stories through storytelling. And so we're very much devoted to, cultural preservation as well. Oh, thank you, Savi. Yeah, we could talk for a little bit about being mixed, and also welcome anyone else in the audience that's mixed as well. I know it's also very complicated to do some code switching. I oftentimes notice that I'm going between my, my Desi and Chamorro culture, as well as, assimilation, being a daughter of immigrants, and trying to be as American as possible. It requires this code switching that can have a lot of mental health impacts as well, especially if you notice that you have to change the way you talk and dress and present yourself in order to feel the sense of belongingness. And oftentimes if you're mixed, you never quite feel enough of one or the other as well. And I'll go ahead and pause there and welcome Erin and Jinya to chime in, and anyone else that'd like to.
I see you, Sammy. Thank you for coming. Thank you for being here. Have a good night. Oh yeah, I have so many things to say on code switching. So I say technically mixed because I wasn't really that connected to my father is half white, half French, and half black. And I was never really connected very much to that side of my family. It was always the black side of my family that I was hanging out with. But I was being raised in the suburbs between DC and Baltimore, in a neighborhood that had literally just legally been forced to stop offering restrictive covenants on houses they were selling. So for those who don't know, restrictive covenants were laws that basically a neighborhood could say, we don't want to sell to anybody who isn't white. And they were allowed to do that. It was like a shitty HOA. Well, or whatever, repetition in terms. Anyway, so in terms of having to code switch, it was a matter of survival. The first fight I got into was when I was 7. A kid called me the N-word. And I had to learn in that moment, like, I couldn't even be directly honest about what happened sometimes because people wouldn't believe me. Or they said, well, what did you do to deserve that? What did you do to make that child call you that? And so right away, I learned that how I speak to white folks has to be different than how my family spoke to one another. And it was weird because my family's somewhat militant, and they otherwise were like, no code switching or whatever. Don't do that. Don't appease whiteness unless you're standing in front of your job and you need to get a paycheck today, And so this conditional appeasement was something I had to get very, very used to. And while I don't think I went through a period of being a pick-me, I definitely went through a period in which I was under the impression that because I could code switch and sound like white people and navigate white people, I had learned a very valuable skill that some other members of my family and community either didn't have, didn't want, or what have you. But it made me different, not special, but different. And then I grew up and I was like, oh, wow, that's a terrible thing. Because it was always about appeasement, and it is always about appeasement. But what I had to learn was the reality of that appeasement So like I work in nonprofit. If we want to get money from white people, we have to be careful about how we talk to them. If we want support from the trans or for the trans and queer community, we have to be mindful about how we speak to people. That isn't to say we need to sanitize our language, but we do have to think about how we're saying things to a certain point. It is not our job to coddle people. And I think there's a difference between having to navigate a dominant whiteness and coddling white people who can't hang. But because I was, I'm a mixed kid, there were members in my family who then put on me that it was my job to be the one code switching in a particular space. Oh, Aaron, you talk white, you go ahead and deal with X, Y, or Z, or call these people and help me with this thing because I don't want to talk to them. And again, utilitarian in some cases, but complicated all the time. And getting older and meeting more Black folks, particularly Black trans and queer people, and Black and brown trans and queer people who are telling me straight up, I don't code switch anymore. I don't do it. I'm not doing it. And I'm out, and seeing that transition and how people do treat them differently. Like, oh my gosh. It goes from always being on certain phone calls and always being asked to come talk to people to suddenly folks barely remember you. Oh, they're glad to see you when you show up somewhere. They know to call you when there's a problem, but they don't want to put you in front. Now, to some degree, that's great. Less tokenizing. But it also affects our visibility and ability to access resources. It's still conditional on coddling people, and we have to use a language they told us we weren't allowed to learn, would beat us if they found we had learned, and thought was some sort of miracle when people like Douglas or Sojourner were able to demonstrate that they had some of this learned knowledge and skill around language. It is I feel, a powerful birthright that we were able to create, whether you want to call it AVE, a pidgin, or what have you, a language out of all of these different languages we spoke outside of the specific construct of whiteness because we had to. And so the audacity of someone to tell me I can't speak that way when I'm like, whatever, it's your ancestors' fault. Again, it's very difficult to navigate some of these spaces. In Portland, I think sometimes people can handle some of the conversation better. But let me tell you, some of my family back home, they aren't ready to hear it. They aren't ready to have the conversation in a particular way. So there we go. That's me.
Thank you so much, Aaron, for sharing your lived experience. And gosh, I feel like this can be a whole topic for a whole class. For myself, being Palauan and white, what my lived experience was, so when people look at me, if they're Palauan and they look at me, they think I'm white. So when I travel back home to Palau, they actually say, and I understand Palauan, I speak it, and I can hear what they're saying is, who is this white girl? Oh, she must be part of the Peace Corps. She must be a teacher. She must be a researcher. And I'll hear their whole conversation about me. And this is something that when I was, right, that face. And when I remember when I was a little girl, so my mom's from the island of Ngaura. We're from the clan Ora Giblai. We're from an outer island on south of the capital. And I remember as a kid, we were really lucky. We lived pretty close to the beach. So my mom would say, okay, you want to go to the beach? Go ahead and go and then come back by this time. And so she let me go by myself. And I remember some folks in the village, we had 125 people living on that island, just to let you know how small this island was. And they said in Palauan, like, oh my gosh, this white child, who does she belong to? Is she lost? And I would say, yeah, like, oh no, I live right over there with, and they're like, how do you speak Palauan? I don't understand. Why do you speak Palauan? And I say, my mother's Palauan, right? And so they're like, oh, okay. But from the time I was a little girl all the way until my adulthood, every time I went back home, always like, who is this white person? But if I'm anywhere else, if I'm on Guam, if I'm anywhere here, like typically people don't see me as a white person. They see me as some kind of person of color, right? I'm kind of this, like people say that I'm like ethnically ambiguous. They can't quite tell what I am. And so I always feel like I'm not Palauan enough and I'm not white enough. And it's just weird space to navigate. And as far as code switching, I did not grow up speaking like this at home. We spoke Palauan to my mother and English to my father. I used to have a Palauan-ish accent, an island accent. Yeah, I'm so sorry. I apologize. But yeah, it's things that have been said to me, that term, Zubby. But yeah, the reason why I speak like this, it's been fully ingrained because I was a telephone operator after I graduated from high school. I was a telephone operator for 5 years. So you pick up the phone and dial 00. And, I'll say, thank you for calling. How may I help you? And so I have crafted this, the way I speak, the tone, and all of that. This was something that, my workplace was like, you have to sound like this. And it's been ingrained in me so much that I speak like this so often. But when I'm with my Islander relatives, I do have something else comes out. My word choice is different. And another thing that I remember growing up is being an interpreter for my mother, my Palauan mother. She spoke English and Palauan and actually Japanese because she was 4 years old at the time of World War II when the Japanese was colonizing the island, our island. So she has a Japanese name, and we actually celebrate Japanese, what do you call it? Some celebrations, and we eat Japanese food. I always thought these were Palauan food, let me tell you, and some Palauan words as well. But it's just, now that I'm an adult and I'm really thinking this through, just how much I helped my mom to navigate situations that was hard for her to navigate because she couldn't really explain herself in English, and she had a really thick Palauan accent, to the point that she would speak English to someone and someone would say, "What did she say?" And I said, "She said it in English. Do you need me to translate her English for you?" Right? But it's just, when I think about that, and my sister, my oldest sister, was born with a mental illness. And so anytime she went to the doctor, I typically went with her to help translate. She is 12 years older than me. I'm the youngest, and I was typically the one who they took to the hospital or to the store to have to explain like what we needed. And I just think that these are things that I did growing up. And I think that's one of the reasons why I'm so patient and I'm so caring, because I grew up taking care of other people, but I'm not great at taking care of myself. And another thing about being mixed here, in being a Palauan person in Oregon, we do have an organization called Rangaligal Belao, which translates to Children of Palau. And so many times when I go to a Palauan event, I get talked about. People don't realize that I can understand them. Or they'll ask me questions like, "Who did you come with? What Palauan friend did you come with?" And I said, "I'm the Palauan that I came with. I came by myself." And it's so hurtful. It makes me want to cry almost every time, to the point where sometimes I have to mentally and physically and emotionally like prepare myself to go to a Palauan event, knowing very well that I'm going to be asked, "Oh, you're Palauan?" I'm going to have to prove it. "Oh yeah, what island? Who, like, who's your mom?" And it's so constantly tiring to have to explain, like, yes, I am Palauan. I've even had friends that I went to college with. I went to Portland State University, and there is this one person who came from Palau and was walking around the library talking in Palauan on the phone. And I was like, "Oh my gosh." And I went up to her and said, "Hi." And she said, "How did you know what I was speaking?" And I said, "Oh, I'm Palauan too." And she was like, "You don't look Palauan." And we became friends. And 3 years later, before she went back home to Palau, she said, "You're more Palauan than I realized." And I said, it's really hurtful that when people try to be the quote unquote, like, deciders of who is part of a population, right? So I was trying to like that's as much as I feel like you're trying to give me a compliment, you're actually really hurting me by saying that it took me 3 years to prove to you that I am Palauan, right? It's like, again, like these thinking about privilege and intersectionality, right? Like, and the things that we say to each other, like one person might think, oh yeah, I'm giving you a compliment, girl. Why are you getting mad? And it's like, you're actually hurting me. And this is something that happens to me a lot. So yeah, those are just a few examples of code switching and how I find myself speaking like this more often than not. But going back and forth is really tiring because it's about interpreting, right? Like if I'm trying to interpret what I'm trying to say or interpret for someone else, it is a lot of work. So thank you for allowing me to share.
That was powerful, Jinya. Thank you so much for sharing your lived experience and your wisdom, and you too, Erin. Yeah, we could definitely teach a whole class on this. We're going to end things with futurism, which is something that just really sings to all of our souls, and really around our liberation and our collective healing and justice. I'll let Erin pop off here, and then we'll talk about PI futurism in the next one.
Totally. I love the concept of Afrofuturism. We at B3C absolutely adore it, in part because it means we're thinking about a future that includes us. It is a new way of being in which we can be accepted, in which we can be safe, in which our identities are if not normalized, they are supported, you know, because it doesn't have to be normal or not normal. We don't need to use those terms anymore because we'll just be who we are. It's really important for us we support artists. We work with youth in our youth leadership program because we do envision a future in which we get to exist. I personally really love a lot of solar punk. Some folks have heard of, like, you know, cyberpunk and stuff like that, dystopian stuff. Most solar punk is not super dystopian. And it really includes a lot of individuals who would live in places where we would see a lot of Pacific Islanders, because water becomes, you know, really important, and we use water for so many different things in the future, extracting the salt, using it for power, so on and so forth. And so I've really enjoyed how much more inclusive solar punk tends to be. They tend to be in societies where all the inclusion work has been done. Everyone is a little bit different. Our communities might be different, but we all work together. And that's what I'm hoping for. I don't want it to be weird that we have the first Black person to do this or the first Black woman to do that. It's frustrating to think that we're in 2023 and I'm going to be hearing that through the course of my life yet. And like, that just sucks. And so instead, we want to continue to think about spaces in which we can really support artists and creatives dreaming into existence a whole new world in which we can be the absolute wildest dreams of our ancestors.
Oh, so moving, Erin. Thank you. I got this at the Pacific Islander Club Luau. How we are our ancestors' wildest dreams. And one of my mentor mentees, a student, reminded me, not all of our ancestors would be proud of us, but our feminist and our anti-racist ancestors would be very, very proud of us, and how we are trying to reimagine the future together based on everything that has happened in the past. And so I just have a few things here, and there's also some body of work in Pacific Islander futurism. One thing that we're so passionate about is self-determination, which is really giving us that autonomy, right, to make our own decisions and to actively participate, as Jenny mentioned, in how we're helped and how we're researched and things that will affect us and our welfare. Decolonization is a huge passion of ours as well. It's become a very trendy term these days, and folks, and I love how folks say, well, that's a good thing, but let's go ahead and unpack that. What does it truly, truly mean? And we really want to just kind of drive our liberation without the interference of the settler colonial white supremacist patriarchic frameworks that have really cause such great harm to, as we mentioned, our health, our mental health, our physical health, our spiritual health, our autonomy, our cultures, our islands, food, and air. And we're also really key on data sovereignty. And that's how I kind of became a super fan of Jinya. And so I don't know if you want to unpack data sovereignty for a little bit, for a minute or so, sis.
Sure. So I feel like as you know, I admit that when I went to college and I got my degrees in education and anthropology, you know, everything I learned was from a westernized lens, was from Western philosophers that my professors were like, this is how we do data collection and this is how we do reporting. And it was gross, it was transactional, it was for the purposes of like capturing stories that were not for, you know, the folks, but for like observations of other cultures, or it just felt really gross. And that when I started doing my own research, I learned about community-based participatory research. And I thought, this is what I want to do, right? I want to make sure that all the research that I do is truly collaborative with the folks. It's not that like, what I don't like is when people come to me and they say something like, oh, I have this whole project already figured out. I just need you to participate. And I look at it and I say, well, what did you plan? And then I show them things like you're taking away from our story, and really letting people know, having questions like, well, who owns the data, right? Like, how is it going to be, how is it going to affect our community? Is it going to benefit our community? So thankfully, through partnerships with different folks, including Dr. Mike Spencer, he gave us a really great opportunity to meet with him to talk about data sovereignty, in which anytime that we do data collection, if somebody were to call us today and say, hey, we want to do a project, we actually have a whole process where we have them complete like an application. Who are you? What have you done for us, right? Like how will we be compensated? What homework have you done on us, right? That type of thing, to really get to the nitty-gritty of who is this person and what are they trying to do with us or for us. And it stuns researchers because they don't know how to react to some of these questions, right? They've never had to do, while they have to do like an internal review board, an IRB through their institute, we have our own community, right? IRB, so to say, like, okay, your institute says you can do it. We didn't say you could do it with us, right? So having them go through us and also negotiating like, okay, if you're going to do a project with us, not only are we going to be compensated, but we need ownership of this. Before you're able to report anything, we have to see all the reports, right? Like, what are you saying about us? Because while we might have said something, the translation or the analysis of it it's not word for word. Yeah, I said this, but this is what I meant. And so many times researchers will do the word for word instead of the actual meaning of it. And so I'm really grateful that we had so many folks who helped us to see things from the point of view of we are worth sharing our stories and creating our stories and owning our stories. And also that we are actually scientists. By, you know, our ancestors were scientists. A scientist is someone who observes and tries things out, and shares it, right? Shares the information. The reason why we know about plant medicine, the reason why we know about how to take care of the ocean, are things that our ancestors figured out and passed on. So actually we are researchers as well, and we can do this work and we should be compensated well for it. I also point out so many times when government or counties or organizations come to us and say, we really want to do this project because we don't really know you all. It's like, well, we know us, and why do you want to know us? What are you using it for? Are you using just to like, just because, right? Like you're supposed to like know how many people live in this area. Like, are you just doing it to count, or are you actually making it for change? Right. So we want to encourage not just collecting for collecting's sake, but making sure that any information that's gathered, it actually is going to go to, you know, like actual systems change, because we want things to be sustainable. We don't want it to be a one-time thing. We want to keep doing this work for us. I dream that we'll finally have our own like Pacific Islander data. I don't want to say institute. I just feel like that's such a, I don't know, like some other word that we'll figure out, but basically a place where people will come to us for that information instead of trying to like find it out for themselves. Those are some of my personal dreams, is making sure that everything for us by us. Thank you, Serena.
Thank you, Gina. So eloquently put. Yeah, 100%. And we're just so grateful for this opportunity just to let you know where we've been, where we are right now, and where we want to be. And I know we're coming to a close, so I just wanted to, before we kind of pause for questions and follow-ups, have you follow us. You can reach out to us at info@utopiaportland.org, or you can reach me at Board Chair. We also have a website. We're on Insta, we're on Facebook, and we'll also be putting out some calls because we are so passionate about education and advocacy, and we're cooking up some really, really great things related to food, as well as mentorship, sovereignty. We're creating a data toolkit, and we're also going to have some telenoas to continue the education, because that's a big part of our tradition, is to share knowledge across the generations in really, really beautiful and culturally sensitive and linguistically accurate ways. So check us out. So I'm going to go ahead and, oh, nice. And thank you, Aaron. Do you want to unpack what's in the chat?
Sure. So we've got some links here. If you want to check out our continuing CCD events, we've got our link to our Eventbrite. The city, the CCDs are made possible with a grant from the city, the Office of Civic and Community Life. And you know how they work. They always want to know who's there, who are you reaching? So we've got some demographic stuff and a sign-in sheet. An eval sheet is there. Let us know how we do. How can we change this? How can we improve this? What else would you like to see? And then we're a nonprofit. You know, we got to ask. So the donation link is at the bottom. Great. So thank you, y'all. I really appreciate this space. I really appreciate an opportunity to just chat, to start building these bridges. I really hope that we can find some more opportunities to do this in community. As I want our community to be bigger. We keep us safe. We keep us safe by getting to know one another. And we can really embody a liberatory justice politic by finding out how we can build, especially as small communities. That's really critical. As small communities, small community-based organizations, we can't necessarily stand up to some of the big ones, and I don't want to. My interest is in options. I don't want us to have to use mainstream resources and hope they have enough for us at the end. I want us to have alternatives where we can go and find ourselves reflected and supported from the beginning. And so that's what we do. So thank you everyone for coming. Thank you for being a part of the CCD process. And thank you for wanting to continue to have conversations. Sometimes they're complicated, sometimes it's really just preaching to the choir. Either way, I'm super here for it. And thank you both, Ginia and Serena, for taking the time and, you know, working this out with us. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you for having us. We are so honored.
Such an honor and a privilege. And yes, we'd love to continue the conversation. And yeah, thank you all for coming. And it's so good to see you, Amy and Shelley.
Yeah, thanks, y'all. Have a great one. Bye, everybody.
Good night, folks. Be safe. See you later.
Bye.
Thanks again. Bye.
Bye.